spotlight you,
Okay.
Professor, and um, we can go from there.
Thank you very much, Carol. Okay, so thanks for joining me tonight. I know we have a big debate in a couple of hours, 2 hours to be exact, between the vice presidential candidate and the vice president, and they will be, well, hopefully, it will be better than the last debate. The last debate was actually pretty bad. Um, so my goal today is to actually walk you through some ways that Twitter can help us understand how the Biden and the Trump campaign have actually built their messaging uh, after late August. And the goal is to also show you, how both campaigns are using Twitter in different formats. So before we jump into the lecture, let's just, cover the state of the race right now, where we are today. Um, Modeling has become a hobby for many people, and many magazines and different media publications have devoted a lot of research to try to predict elections. The Economist, of course, is predicting that Biden has a 90% chance of winning, with for Trump 10%. Um, 538, of course, tells us that it's closer to 17% chance of winning for the president, or 79 and 100. And the people at 271 to 270 to win, which is they have the map that that most people tend to see, one way or the other in the news media. Um, Basically takes all the polls from the Real Clear Politics average, and basically has no toss-ups. And here you can see that Biden right now would probably win a pretty big majority of the electoral college, while
Um,
Trump will only get 169. Yes.
the slides aren't moving with you.
Oh, they're not moving. So that happened to us yesterday, huh? So let me just do something really quickly and see if this works. Okay, so does this work now, Casey?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Casey. I really, really appreciate that you actually brought that up. Um, so, so here you can also see, in front of us, the map. So there's a map with no toss-ups. Um, do I think that's actually going to happen? It's too early to say, but definitely it's looking more and more probable that that's going to happen. Let's look at the role of social media in politics today. Today, close to 70% of Americans are active social media users. In other words, that they actually go every single day to at least one of the main social media platforms in the United States. And in the United States, we have three big platforms. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm not putting here YouTube, but YouTube would be actually bigger than Instagram. It would be in the 30s. Not to say that it shouldn't be counted, is that most people don't really think of YouTube as a social media, because people tend to consume more than to share things altogether. The Pew Research Center has found that over time, Facebook has grown to the biggest share of social media use in the United States is with Facebook. Around 69% of Americans are active Facebook users. The numbers, for Twitter are a little bit lower. Instagram is the one that is growing the quickest. An important reason why social media matters and why we should study it is because most Americans are actually getting their news primarily via social media networks, especially Facebook. And that, of course, has some good and bad. Good in the sense that people can be exposed to multiple media sources, but bad in the sense that people tend to only consume the medias, that represent their ideology. So they live in an echo chamber. And that, of course, is problematic and probably explains the level of polarization that we have in American politics. Political campaigns, use of social media has definitely have become more and more, attuned to this reality. It started really with the 2008 campaign, where Barack Obama used Facebook in order to be able to mobilize his coalition. In 2012, he used Facebook not only, for mobilizing, but also for fundraising purposes and advertising. So today, most campaigns, the big ones, definitely have a big presence on social media. And the benefits, of course, are pretty simple. Candidates can bypass the news media scrutiny. So rather than having to use the media to filter the message of the candidates can go directly to their followers and make a case for whatever position they hold. Many candidates, post messages to shape how the news media covers an event. This is something that Trump has done quite convincingly since 2016. Whenever he wants to change the conversation, he will post something that is controversial and force people to change the messaging around it. And as you probably have seen in the media as of late, people tend to actually cite the posts of not only Trump but other candidates as well. And that really shows, that candidates can really shape and set the agenda for how the media covers, particular events. Another benefit that is actually quite big for campaigns today is that many more eyes are in social media than they are in regular TVs or in radio, and the advertising rules for social media are definitely lax, or they're more flexible than they are under TV and radio. The FCC definitely has a lot of power in TV and radio, but they don't have that kind of power in social media. As you probably all know, Twitter has definitely banned most political advertising, but that's not the case in Facebook. In Facebook, anything goes. And while Facebook is trying to clean up misinformation campaigns and so forth, still to this day, there is quite a bit of advertising from both sides that is not completely accurate, and it's driving, misinformation in the process. And also PACs and other actors are also flooding Facebook and other social media sites with with the advertising that is not always, in line with reality. There are other benefits, of course. Like I mentioned, Obama was really good at doing this, and President Trump did pretty good in 2016. But fundraising efforts, are important. Bernie Sanders was another person that really used social media in this way, especially to get small little contributions. Let me see something really quickly. So somebody said, that Facebook stopped advertising. Maybe they did. So that's actually pretty interesting. And let me see. A key element in other benefits, is that, media, the candidates are using Facebook and other media to stream live events. And that is definitely becoming very, very popular way. So you can see in the Trump campaign is, the rallies were used, they were transmitted via Facebook, and they used to get 1 million, 2 million hits, during the transmission. And that's actually pretty big. Another element is that campaigns are using social media to get out the vote. And we see this a lot with younger people. They also help, media, the campaigns test the effectiveness of campaign messaging, something that we'll talk about more in a couple of minutes. The best campaigns, or the savviest, are using social media networks to understand their followers' interests. And more importantly, micro-targeting different voting groups is an important thing that happens in campaigns. Usually it was done via a mail, but now we're seeing it more and more via social media. And so those are some of the ways that political campaigns will use the social media. Now, for today's talk, I will be analyzing Twitter rather than Facebook or Instagram, data from Facebook and Instagram. And here's the reason why. For the most part, Facebook data tends to be a little bit better than Twitter data. It's definitely it's longer, and it has more information, and that, creates, a better sense of where people stand on different issues. But because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal of 2016, Facebook has really curtailed access to its data. So researchers can still, study political campaigns using this data, but they need to work via Social One, the Social One initiative, which is part of a Facebook Harvard University initiative. So researchers will be able to apply through this initiative, access to the data, but unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Before 2016, or before 2017, when the rules changed, anybody with an app in Facebook could actually access the data from the public pages, and you could actually analyze in real time how people felt or people reacted to different postings. That's not the case anymore. It's actually quite difficult. There's ways to get around that, but it would be violating some of Facebook's rules altogether. Twitter data, however, is extremely accessible. There are some limitations, of course. Twitter access to the archive is only for 7 days. You can only download up to 18,000 tweets per day. not per day, per hour. So there's all these limitations that you have, but at least, you can get a really good sense, of how campaigns are shaping their messaging. One good thing is that all tweets tend to become Facebook posts one way or the other. So if you see most of the Facebook postings that you see for the Trump campaign and for the Biden campaign, they started as a tweet beforehand. So at least, you have a sense, when you start trying to study the messaging from each campaign, you have a better feel by using Twitter than Facebook. But Facebook, of course, is the king of social media in the world. 2.7 billion people are active users around the world. 69% of Americans are active in Facebook. Twitter is much smaller, has only 340 million active users around the world, and only 22% of Americans are actively using Twitter on a daily basis. So if you want to try to understand the reality of this race, Joe Biden has around 10.6, almost 10.7, million followers. That is actually quite high from where he started last year when he got close to 7. Trump right now has closer to 87.1, and that is, he's actually one of the politicians that has the most followers in the world. I think Prime Minister Modi and President Obama tend to lead him a little bit, but not by a lot. So Trump definitely uses Twitter as a megaphone going forward. In comparison, Trump has around 30 million followers in Facebook, and Joe Biden has around 2 million followers. No, close to 3 million followers in Facebook. So definitely Trump has more followers than Joe Biden in the thing. As a fun fact, the Pew Research Center estimates that around 20% of America, 19% of Americans follow Trump in Twitter, and that's actually pretty amazing in itself. Okay, so let's look more into each candidate's use of Twitter. So when you download Twitter data, you can actually see the source of the data, or what device was used in order to post the data into the Twitter feed. We know that most of the tweets that are posted in President Trump's feed are actually written by President Trump himself. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, the good thing, of course, is that the president is expressing his views, and we tend to understand how he thinks and sees the world. The bad thing, of course, from a campaign perspective, is that the president is not very disciplined. The president, starts rambling on multiple issues and starts, forcing the campaign to recalibrate every single time that he tweets. On the other hand, the Biden campaign tends to use different sources, but all of them are basically computer-based sources. So they're not for mobile platforms. They're mostly done for laptops or desktops. And why is that important? Because we know from multiple news analysis that Mr. Biden is not writing his own tweets, that the tweets are being written by the campaign, and they're being designed in order to promote different points of view, but they're not necessarily the views of Biden. Biden in the past was writing a couple of tweets, but he was not a very active Twitter user before he entered the 2020 race during the primaries. The Twitter use definitely increased dramatically after Iowa, and it's mostly an operation led by his social media team in the campaign. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that Trump is writing his own tweets. And if you have questions later on how we know that, there's a ton of analysis out there that explain patterns in how Trump expresses himself that can allow us to understand, which tweets are being posted by him or by Dan Scavino, who is basically his right-hand man when it comes to social media postings. Biden's and Trump's tweets, behavior are in this graph. You can see that Trump tends to tweet more than Biden. That graph has something we call organic tweets. Those are tweets that are written by the candidate. They're not retweeting a post from another person. These are the ones that are being at least written by the campaign and posted into the feed, but they're not retweeting other people's posts. So Trump, of course, has the lead in this one. Trump uses Twitter quite a bit, and this should not be surprising. So something for you guys to keep in mind. But notice that the campaign has definitely tweeted quite a bit. That the Biden campaign does actually tweet quite a bit, and compared to Hillary Clinton back in 2016, the Biden campaign is definitely using Twitter more than Mrs. Clinton did in 2016. If we look at the retweets, that's when somebody decides to share a post from another person, a post that may reflect the views of the candidate or the campaign or the president. In this case, we can see that Mr. Trump tends to retweet more than the Biden campaign, and it's always interesting to see what he's retweeting, because a lot of it happens to be falsehoods, some misinformation, and as well as other information that it has a conspiracy feel to it, and a lot of this retweets have definitely made a lot of noise in the media over the years. If we look at the average daily retweets for Biden and Trump's organic tweets, as a reminder, when you're using Twitter, there's three ways to engage. One way to engage is to retweet a post. So you may actually find a post very interesting, so you decide to share it with your followers, with people in your feed, and that of course allows a tweet to go viral. So every single campaign wants to actually get those posts retweeted in order to actually get them to spread around the internet. Notice that Trump, although he was very, very active in Twitter compared to Biden, the average retweet per day is actually not that high. It was definitely high last week as the president tweeted about his condition with the COVID at Walter Reed. But for the most part, you can see that the Biden campaign has been able to stay pretty close in the game in terms of retweets. And again, retweets are important because you're trying to spread the message and you want your followers to be retweeting in order to really spread it to people who may not be following the president, or for the matter, the vice president. So retweeting matters. The other way you can engage with a tweet is by favoring the tweet, by actually saying that you like it, put the little heart, you create a favorite. Here again, we see a very similar pattern as well. We see that, for the most part, the campaign, the Trump campaign, is actually, not getting that many favorites. Actually, the numbers of favorites have declined a little bit since the Republican National Convention took place, which is problematic for the administration. And we see that the Biden campaign in some days actually did better in terms of favorites than the president's team did on different days. This is very important because once you see people putting favorites in the posts, they're kind of saying that they like the things that they're seeing. And again, very, very important. And here, of course, we have the outlier of the president's, staying in Walter Reed. So with what I have left, let me just try to look at the messaging after the Republican National Convention and basically Trump's decision to use a law and order message after the convention. Most of the message, at least until the end of October, at the end of September, was basically around law and order, as you will see. And this is, of course, as a reaction to what happened in Kenosha during the RNC, which, of course, ties into the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the other protests that took place after the Lloyd incident. So background information. As you probably all know, if you were looking at the RNC or the Republican National Convention, the second night of the convention, they decided to highlight law and order. President Trump has always been a very big supporter of law enforcement. And since, the Minneapolis protests, he had been able to make the case that that Democratic-run cities were a problem, and that a stronger hand from law enforcement was necessary to put down the looting and the rioting. And just to make it very clear, the protests, we had over 1,900 protests that broke out around the nation since the killing of George Floyd, and that that only 12 people have died in overall in this protest. So even though some of them did turn violent and some of them did involve looting, the great majority, close to 90%, and there's a team at Princeton University that has been actually cataloging this data, actually, has found that, that they're mostly peaceful. So it's important to keep that in mind. But the president, of course, has exaggerated the claim. And if you look at Fox News, you would think that the world is, that the American cities are burning down, which is not completely the case. But on background information, with the second night of the convention, there was, of course, a shooting at Kenosha. A young black man, Jacob Blake, was shot by a white police officer, and that forced many people in Kenosha to take to the streets to protest police violence and police brutality. Those protests did go violent. They did involve some looting and burning down of buildings. So the governor of Wisconsin asked the National Guard to step in and to help law enforcement. A couple of days after that took place, there was a counter protest that formed on behalf of Blue Lives Matter, and a young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, 17-year-old, really boy, went in with a machine gun and actually shot 3 protesters, killing 2 of them. And also those protesters were, of course, black, and that really led to more tensions in the street, and many people didn't know what to do. President Trump, would visit later Kenosha to thank police officers and the National Guard, and Biden will definitely visit later on in order to meet with the Blake family and try to talk a little bit about violence. But for the most part, the president, and his campaign decided that they wanted to actually, use, Kenosha and the uprisings that we saw in other parts of the country, in Portland and so forth, as a way to mobilize support among the base, and more importantly, to try to attract the votes of suburban Americans. For the most part, the campaign, the Biden campaign, tried to ignore the president's law and order message at the beginning, although he was forced to go to Kenosha and to Wisconsin and talk about it. So did Kamala Harris, as well, have to go to Wisconsin and talk about the issue. What's important to understand is that at this moment in time, when Trump was really amping up the situation in Kenosha for political gain, many pundits and local Democratic officials in Wisconsin and in the Midwest were very concerned that the president had found a wedge issue and that he could use this in order to revive his campaign. So many pundits, in the Atlantic, in the New York Times, were asking, the Biden campaign to actually take seriously the challenge, posed by the president, and to really go head on the issue. The Biden campaign, for the most part, did not want to address this concern, and the reason is simple. By Kenosha, a lot of the demands from the Black Lives Matter movement had actually, become less popular with the American people. The week after Kenosha shootings, the Pew Research Center published a poll showing that support for the demands of BLM had declined by quite a bit of percentage points. And that really was rattling a little bit, the Democratic campaign. So Biden decided that he would definitely deal with the racial injustice part of the equation, but not necessarily deal with the issues of police reform. He wanted to do police reform, but not the defunding of the police, which was the big issue. So the idea was to dance around the issue, but not to address it directly on. The idea for the Biden campaign was to actually stick to their game plan, which is to turn this election into a referendum on the president's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. And their numbers suggested that if they actually built the case against the president on the COVID-19 issue, that they could actually still win the election very convincingly. So why did the Trump campaign focus on law and order? We're going to be looking at that rather than immigration. And of course, we'll look into the other side of the equation in a second. So to actually rephrase the thing, here we go. We can actually do some analysis in the computer, so we can take all the the tweets from Trump up to, you know, the RNC. So from I looked at the tweets from the 1st of January of 2020 to 8/23 to August 23, and then we can tell the computer, okay, I want to see the big, you know, what we call unigrams, the big words, you know, that stick out and that are basically, you know, available into most tweets. So what I did was, you know, it was a simple formula. I basically looked for what the average was, you know, for the average retweet during this time period, and the average, you know, favorites, as you will see in the next slide. And then I would say, if the tweet got a higher score than the average, then that is a tweet that is good for the president. If the tweet is actually, you know, has lower average score than the average score that we calculate, then this is a bad tweet, a bad message for the president. Not surprisingly, if you can see the I don't know, hopefully people can see this. It's pretty small, and I apologize by that, but there are a lot of things. You can see that issues like Corona, impeachment, the economy, health, the virus, Clinton, border, jobs, vaccine, trade, wall, are basically, you know, negative to flat. When you start moving more into immigration, Joe as Joe Biden, hoax, Biden, Dow, law, Supreme Court, Portland, fake, drug, and drug is not about drug dealers, but about drugs used to deal with the corona, virus. You start noticing here that a lot of the terms or words tend to get more traction. Notice Antifa, which is a reference to, you know, the anti-fascist, you know, terrorists that the president talks about all the time, does very, very well. Minneapolis also did really, really well in terms of other issues. So the president is not being, and the campaign were not irrational. They looked at their numbers. I don't know if they looked at the numbers. I'm assuming that they looked at their numbers, and they started noticing that there were certain, you know, things that actually worked very well. But I'd be willing to bet, you know, that the other side also looked at the same data, and they were actually noticing that Corona and other issues were very negative with the Trump supporter. And that actually, you know, opens the door for a critique of the Trump's administration's views. If we look, let me see, if we look at the favorites, the pattern is very, very similar. So you can see that, you know, before the Republican National Convention, anything related to health and corona and virus was not doing very, very well. And, you know, of course, you know, anything related to law and order tends to do a little bit better altogether. So again, not a surprise, but these are the favorites, you know, going forward. I would actually emphasize here the Supreme Court, because you will see later that actually that didn't do too well after the president, you know, nominated the Coney Barrett to the thing. How's the Trump's law and order message work? Yes and no. You will see in a second that if you look at the backgrounds, you know, that happened after the RNC, you can see that Joe Biden is still up. Law enforcement did pretty good. The Supreme Court, of course, goes up because of the opening. Radical left, you know, National Guard. So you have all the important things right here: Nancy Pelosi, President Trump, etc. Anarchist agitators. But what you start also noticing is that the level of engagement is actually not that high. If you compare engagement pre-RNC to post-RNC, it's actually, you know, fallen off a little bit, and that is a source of concern for this campaign. The same applies to the numbers here. The numbers, you know, are showing that this message really works, but notice that, you know, other issues like drugs, which is the drugs that we use to fight COVID, tend to do really well for the president. The vaccine, which were numbers that were negative, have become positive for the president. But issues like Portland, Kenosha, and whatsoever are also important. So again, you know, it's not irrational for the administration to have for the campaign to actually double down on this message. But there's other issues that could actually be working for him as well into the future. Antifa, for instance, you know, does a little bit, you know, that doesn't do as strongly as it was doing before. And it's because there's other issues that people have in their minds. And one of them is the COVID crisis, which, you know, probably was magnified by the fact that he got sick last week. So how did Joe Biden, react to the law and order message? Well, here are the top migrants for him, for the Biden campaign: Donald Trump, President Trump, American people, healthcare, White House climate change, beat Donald, economic crisis, election day, Social Security. These are all basically, issues that resonate with the campaign's central message. But notice that there is no mention here from any of the cities. There is no mention of Louisville, Breonna Taylor. There is no mention of Floyd. There's no mention of the protest or any of those issues. For the most part, the Biden campaign has really centered their issues on healthcare and the corona crisis. And they have basically made this, a referendum on the president's handling of that crisis. And that is definitely working in the polls. So there's no reason to actually, to break this one if it's actually working. However, I decided to do what I did for the tweets that mention certain, issues. This was not a scientific approach, by the way. This was mostly me playing around a couple of days ago to look at where we are, in terms of, tweets that mention different, things. And you start noticing that engagement with Biden is actually not as strong as Trump's, base of engagement. Many of the issues that the vice president has talked about have not really, been able to surpass or, go higher than the average tweets, the retweet tweet score. So issues like Obamacare, climate, pandemic is here twice, I guess, definitely do a little bit better. But, notice that racial justice, protests, immigrants, Kenosha, they actually, didn't fare well compared to the other area. Notice here that, that Portland did better, that police did a lot better, and that Louisville did really well here. And there's only actually two posts, two tweets connected to Louisville, which was, connected to the jury decision on the Breonna Taylor, case. So let me just try to conclude here a little bit, and I'll take your questions for sure. In trying to explain Biden's feed, we should definitely, know that he's trying to play it safe, and his job is to preserve his coalition by avoiding controversial topics. Talking about race and other issues, is something that can be disheartening to many of his followers. But for the campaign right now, it's better not to enter into those controversial topics because it can definitely, fracture some of the unity that he has, behind him. But I would say that, some of the tweets connected to Portland, the police, and Louisville did better than probably the campaign would have expected. And I would say that the vice president should tackle those issues because they're forefront in the minds of many Americans. And I believe that it's important that, that they challenge Trump going forward. Of course, the fear from pundits, and I don't really share this fear too much, but for the most part, many people believe that this position may actually weaken his support, or that it will not, inspire African Americans to come out in big numbers. One African American activist, part of the BLM movement in Baltimore, put it this way to a CNN reporting: "Voting is not an expression of my moral values, the decision to choose the political terrain that we fight on." And I think many Democrats don't really see Biden as their number one choice, but what they see in Biden is the possibility of actually getting rid of Trump and opening the door for a new type of politics, one that can bring a semblance of order to the chaos and try to start the healing of a nation after 4 years of this administration. I think it is worth noting that many people are not voting for Biden, but against Trump. The Economist YouGov poll has been asking this question now for 9 months about, how people feel about Biden versus Trump. And it is very, very clear that a majority of Americans, around 60% of Democrats that are polled and independents, are not voting for Biden necessarily. They're voting against Trump. They would vote against Trump, with any Democrat that you put in front of them. And I think it's important that we notice that. In terms, if Trump can pull a surprise victory, I think it's unlikely at this time. I do believe that the message on law and order did appeal to his base, and it actually may attract some undecided voters. And the CBS News national poll for September, and there's a couple in August and two in September. I'm waiting for the one in October. Actually, does show that that people really did, that there was an appeal to the law and order messaging, and that was actually working. But the problem for the campaign right now is that it lacks focus and unifying message. And given that Biden has been able to turn this into a referendum, the president's handling of COVID-19, I think it's just very, very difficult for the president to be able to change the subject. And so far, he has not been able to do so. And the fact that he got sick, with Corona, means, of course, that that is very, very difficult for him to change the subject. So right now, the way that I see it, I don't think he will win. But, I could be proven wrong. I mean, after all, in 2016, I thought that Mrs. Clinton was going to win by a little bit. I didn't think it was going to be a big, big win, but I did think that she was going to win. And there's still a possibility for the president to turn things around. But I think it's unlikely given his inability to be disciplined and to stick to one single message. And just for the sake of fun, just for the sake of controversy and to make this fun, this is actually my map today. This is a potential map for November 3rd. I think we may have a tie in the Electoral College. The new poll in Maine that came out actually shows that he will be taking the second district. Maine divides its Electoral College vote, and I think this is a potential a map that could actually take place. Wisconsin could go Republican again by a little bit, and I think the president will keep Florida and North Carolina right now. But things are changing, and we'll see whether the Biden campaign can change the dynamics of this race, and turn Georgia or Texas or Florida or North Carolina into or Wisconsin for that matter into blue states. We will see. Nevada here is in red, and I don't know why, but I mean because some polls are showing that the president is getting some traction. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm trying to be provocative right now. So anyhow, I'll leave it there, and I'll take your questions, and I'll stop sharing the thing. So go for it. If you have any questions, please let me know.
So I did remove the spotlight. You can ask your questions in the chat, or you can also use the raise your hand feature. Someone must have a question.
I'll ask a question to the people here. So how many of you are using Twitter on a daily basis? Oh, Gabby's using Twitter, so let's see who else is using Twitter. Not only Gabby? Is it me and Gabby only?
No, there's a few more.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say, come on. I mean, like people, we have to be using Twitter. So 3 participants raised their hands. Well, that's good. So anybody have questions, for me, please let me know. I can talk to you more about, how you get the data out of Twitter. I didn't want to get into all that information. That's kind of the boring stuff.
So we do still have some hands raised. Is it Camilla? Did you have a question? Karina? Or is that just still up for Twitter?
No, actually, I can see that Martha has has a question.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, I do. I have several questions, but I'll save it for one, which is, given that those of us who are ancient mostly are on Facebook, and those of us who are young are largely on Instagram, are they accounted for with your Twitter stuff that both groups, as far as I can see, don't care for?
So that's a good question about the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter dynamics. So Instagram is owned by Facebook, as you probably know, and access to the data from Instagram is as difficult as it is from Facebook. The problem with Instagram as well is that Instagram is based mostly on video or pictures. So the context to understand the post is connected to the pictures that are used. And that makes it very difficult to actually do some analysis on the data. However, Instagram is, as you noted, where young people are. And I would say other social medias like TikTok and I guess, Snapchat are also pretty important. But for the most part, all campaigns are trying to grow their numbers. President Trump amazingly has over 23 million of Americans following him on Instagram right now. And he has a lot more than Biden or Kamala Harris or even Pence. And what people have to remember is that the president used social media or leveraged social media in 2016 quite convincingly. So he has a head start from Biden. Biden really didn't think of running for the presidency until the other day. And the Biden team has really grown his presence online, but it will not be Obama's presence and it will not be Trump's presence, because you need to actually be able to use the platform on a daily basis and actually drive the traffic to there. Trump, not everybody that follows Trump is supporting Trump. Many people are following Trump because they want to also see, how he either fails or succeeds, right? I mean, it's not about supporting him. And I think it's important that we mentioned that, out of the 87 million people that follow him, many people are not even Americans. They're from other countries in the world. So not all of them are voters, but the president does have a big following. The president has a megaphone that he can use, and the president definitely posts to Facebook what he puts in Twitter, but what he puts in Twitter is not placed on Instagram. So the Instagram is a different type of curation that is mostly short videos or pictures of him leaving the White House or getting into the helicopter, or a little video saying happy holidays or whatever. It's just a different type of format for him. Facebook and Twitter are very, very similar in terms of posting for him. His posts are really short. They're concise and to the point. They're all under 280 words. And that's what makes him an interesting guy altogether.
So we have a few questions in chat and we have a couple of raised hands. So I think I'm going to go back and forth. Is Biden better off not debating Trump anymore and just focusing on social media efforts instead?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that actually. Last debate was horrible. I personally I saw the debate with my family up in Maine, and my in-laws are really strong Trump supporters, and even they were not happy with the debate. They didn't think that the president did a good job making the case for re-election. I personally, if I had been Biden, I would have walked away from the debate. I would have taken up my microphone and said, "This is just ridiculous," and walked away. I don't see any benefits to debate the president at this point. I also believe strongly that the president should be in quarantine for a bunch of days, and that the October 15th debate should not take place, and that the October 22nd debate should take place only if the president has actually tested negative and is not contagious anymore. But I don't think he should put anybody else in danger. I don't think any news network should actually play by the rules, and I think Biden should call him out for that one. So in my view, no, they shouldn't. And in terms of Biden, he shouldn't change what he's doing because he's actually leading in the polls. The newest poll from CNN has him 16 points off, and that is not going to hold. It's going to come down a little bit, but I do think right now they're looking pretty strong. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Carly.
Hi. Do you think that President Trump's current use of Twitter will sway the coming presidents to use Twitter as a way to directly interface with the people of the United States?
Don't know actually. I mean, Obama had a big following, but he didn't use Twitter all that often. He would, sometimes put a picture of his dog Bo, or put a picture of the girls or the family. But for the most part, he didn't use it for political purposes. He used it to, to share his, the books that he was reading, or share a picture of his, iPhone with all the list of music that he was into, or showing a picture of, of NCAA bracket. But for the most part, he wasn't really a political guy. Trump really has changed the conversation. And Trump, I believe, doesn't want other people to represent him to the media. He wants to represent himself. He thinks that he knows what's best for him. And I think that's the problem that Trump has. Is a very undisciplined person. And Twitter is just part of that, persona that he has built. So I would think in the future, when we go back to normal, we learned that social media can help a candidate really work on the messaging and try to understand what works and doesn't work. But I don't think it should definitely be used as a way to communicate on a daily basis. I think that there's still a place for a press secretary. I think there's still a place, for a more traditional, way of doing, communication strategies into the future. So I'm hoping that's the case. I hope we don't go down into the Twitter rabbit hole or into the Facebook rabbit hole, because that is driven not by media ratings, but by the number of likes or retweets or comments or shares that you get, and that's actually pretty bad for politics, I think.
So this is, I guess, can be considered a follow-up to that question. Do you think that some social media sites such as Twitter will limit or flag Trump tweets on election night?
Yeah, I mean, they are flagging the tweets more and more right now. I mean, and they should. The president is using language that is divisive and that has no basis in reality. And I think they should definitely start calling him out for that one. And I think there's a responsibility from the social media platforms to try to promote a more even-handed conversation about the future. I mean, in reality, social media can be a great equalizer. It could be a way to really, get people to enter into a discourse where we can deliberate, about the good and bad of politics. But as it is right now, it has become, a place for trolls and for others to demean other people and to actually, try to strike down any criticism. So I do think, social media networks have to do a better job patrolling their own followers and enforcing rules of engagement and asking not only the president and other leaders, but also their followers, to actually play by those rules. And Twitter has done that a little bit. Facebook has had more difficulty doing so. I mean, Facebook has more people, has more at stake. The amount of money being spent in Facebook right now, advertising, and I noted the issue, but both campaigns were spending millions of dollars on a daily basis in Facebook until much earlier. So anything else, that's my 2 cents on that one.
Okay, great. Phil, are you here still?
I think I have Phil and Don as well.
I'm here.
The American is just going to ask me the question now.
I'm going to ask question. Carlos, I find this really interesting, and I mean, particularly the people who follow Trump, and as you just mentioned, not everyone who follows Trump supports Trump. What do you think are the consequences of this? I think compared to campaign ads, everybody gets them. I mean, you can turn them off if you want, right? You can walk away, do whatever. But are people following it either because, well, I've already made up my mind, I like Trump or I don't like Trump, but it's not going to influence me. I'm following Biden because I like him. What do you think is going on here? What do you think, what kind of influence that these tweets have on the people who are following them? And I'll shut up and listen.
So there's actually pretty good social science and some marketing data behind this as well. Is that people that, you follow a brand or you follow a person that you agree with, one of the things that people say in their tweets is that retweeting doesn't mean that we accept the tweet, right? I mean, we don't support the tweet when we retweet. That's kind of BS. The reality is that when we retweet things that we tend to have some affinity to. And the reality is that we follow people, leaders. I mean, not only Trump, but also the Secretary General of the United States, because we want information about their positions. And doesn't mean that we always agree with the positions, but we want to learn more about where they stand on multiple issues. We care. People that are engaged politically are following the president. And like I said, not everybody is actually, supporting the president. A lot of people follow in order to actually, understand how he thinks and he looks at the world. And I know many people who have left, the president's Twitter feed because they can't handle, what he says, and it creates a lot of anxiety. And I know Carol had mentioned that before to me in a private email, but I know people that, that have done that. And I have dropped him a couple of times, like the other day when he came back to the White from Walter Reed, I unfollowed him because I was really angry with what he did. but that's part of what Trump is doing. Trump is trying to be provocative. Trump is trying to grow his audience. He has a megaphone, and that megaphone is very, very powerful, and he can actually sidetrack the media thanks to that megaphone. Whenever the president tweets something, people are putting in the front page of the newspapers and in their articles, and they're actually citing the whole, it's its picture and the little words, right? I mean, and the whole news cycle can change in 2 seconds thanks to what Trump says on Twitter. And it's that kind of power is amazing, because it actually defends the social media. The president has been able to use his Twitter feed to actually promote the idea that media is fake in the United States. And in doing so, it's actually delegitimizing a lot of the things that we hold dear in our democratic values. And I think it's dangerous, but it is the way that it works right now. So I know Don has been raising his hand for a while, because I've seen it's one of the few people that I can see in my screen. So do you mind if I call on Don?
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. You mentioned the possibility of a tie in electoral votes. It occurs to me, I have no idea what happens with something like that. It's never happened before, I believe. And if there is indeed a tie, what's the next step?
So I mean, Phil Mundo could be definitely is better prepared to answer that question than me. But the way that I see it is that if there's a tie, it has to go into the electoral college for a decision. And if that doesn't work, then the states, each state has 1 vote, and they will decide, the presidency. If I'm correct, Phil, can you want to jump in on this one? The House, right? It goes to the House. So every single state has 1 vote, right?
1 vote, which means the Republican would win.
Right. 26. There's 26 states that are now Republican controlled, and 24 that are Democratic. If I remember my math right.
Something like
I don't.
That right? So 1 vote per state, and Republican would win, huh?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Phil, go for it.
Yeah, 1 vote for each state delegation. So New Jersey gets 1 vote, Wyoming gets 1 vote, California gets 1 vote, and presumably whatever party controls that state will that's the candidate they'll vote for. However, with President Trump, who knows?
Controls as defined how? You mentioned who controls that state. How is it defined? What party controls the state?
The majority in the House delegation. So in New Jersey, it's a majority Democrats. So it would be Democrats who won.
Yeah, there's only 1 Republican, I believe, right now in the majority in the New Jersey, Ben Drew, who might be losing anyhow.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you remember before, and I'll take another question in a second. But before he got sick, he was talking about this possibility of a fake the ballots and all that. Part of the reason that he's delegitimizing the whole electoral process is because he knows that the Hail Mary that he has is that that we don't know who's going to be the candidate that wins by the electoral college, and the electoral college will be forced to make a decision on the fly. And I think it's unlikely, but I think part of his idea is that he's going to try to question the whole process until the last second in order to give himself a chance to win. And I know that I tend to be more objective about politics, to be completely honest, and I try to put myself in the shoes of Republicans that support the president. But after this weekend, I have to admit I have kind of completely lost some of my objectivity going forward. So I have, Carol, you have other questions for me?
I do. I have one from Janelle in the chat, and then I'm going to go to Gabby and Karina. It seems like Trump has been using his megaphone lately on Twitter and in TV interviews and rallies to fuel voters' doubts and mistrust of mail-in voting. Did you look at that topic specifically in his social media posts and how it might be directly impacting public opinion on the issue? A recent study found that he was the main source of misinformation during COVID, so I'd be interested if something similar is being looked at with mail-in voting.
So that's a good question, and I did not in that sense. When you put all the tweets from Trump from the Republican National Convention to today through the computer, you tell the computer, give me the top terms or top topics, depending on how many of them are, so you can create a word cloud. So the mail stuff doesn't come until really low in the numbers. And I think you're right. I mean, I think the president has used, his social media following and any opportunity he has to talk about the unfairness of the election according to his perspective. Of course, he's a victim. He thinks about this, but I did not look at the numbers. It's something that I can look into the future, but I couldn't do it right now, of course. But it's definitely something that I can look into to see how Americans are reacting do his views. But again, what I did is I actually went through my list of top 25, terms or topics, and then from there I tested those ones in the computer. But I could definitely do more testing later on. So send me an email, and I'll try to answer your question later on by looking at the data. There's an answer to it. I just don't have it. Okay.
Gabby.
Gabby.
Hello. This is more of a comment / question. So I think one of the things you discussed during the presentation was that the media definitely does sensationalize a lot of events and stories taking place in the world, which of course can have a large impact on the public's response and how we interpret it, thus, changing the way we react to a lot of these things. So I'm just wondering, I remember you said that Facebook has, I believe, the largest amount of adult participation in comparison to like Instagram or Twitter, which is typically more so used by like Gen Z, to say the least.
Sure.
So that being said, there's definitely that variation in audience. Therefore, Facebook, I'm considering it's more adults, they'll interpret it differently than a person who's majority on Twitter or Instagram. And I think you can definitely see that because Trump tends to use Twitter more than Instagram, from what I've noticed at least.
Yeah.
So do you think that these different social media platforms and the people who engage with them in terms of like, I guess, age have an impact on the voter response? Does that make any sense? I don't know.
No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And let me just be very clear, Trump is not posting his own stuff in Instagram, okay? They do have a campaign that is doing that for him. So they actually curating what they think works from the Twitter or Facebook side to actually put it towards, the issue. And while Instagram tends to actually, skew younger, the reality is that the average Instagram user is around 30 years old. Okay, so I know younger people tend to use it, but the Pew Research Center has done all this research on who uses what. Young people definitely use Snapchat and TikTok a lot more than older people. Snapchat is being used for politics. It's just, very difficult to study Snapchat because things go away. And, it's kind of difficult to measure something when it doesn't exist after a while. But nevertheless, what's important to understand is that young people definitely have a place here. And this generation is a lot savvier about computers. It's definitely, more in tune, and they're getting their information through social media one way or the other. Whether that's good or bad is something that we can discuss, of course. Whether the newspaper is a better place or news TV, but a lot of people are consuming their daily feed of information from social media. And a lot of that can be skewed as well, right? I mean, so even though a Democrat may actually, be more informed than a Republican, for some people, the reality is that Democrats also live in their own bubbles. And sometimes they need to be able to get out of their bubble to be able to understand the issue from a different perspective. So my big thing here, and it's what I do when I do my social media consumption, is that I follow people from both the left and the right, and journalists who are in the left and the right as well, right? I mean, so I follow a lot of Wall Street Journal people. I even follow people from Breitbart, who I don't agree with, of course, but I want to be able to see multiple points of view to try to get a sense of how to do that. So for me, young people should do the same thing. Inform yourself, please get out and vote. This is your country as much as anything. One of the reasons that Democrats actually had a blue wave was because young people showed up in big numbers. And as you probably know from the voting project that Drew, a lot of Druids, actually got people to vote. And it really changed the dynamics of the race in Madison, because now we have a Democratic mayor. Before we had Republican ones, because a lot of young kids, went out to vote in big numbers and made a difference. So please, vote, assert yourself, tell people if you think it's important, tell them what your issues are, and make sure that the candidates who are elected, be a Democratic, Republican, Green, Libertarian, whoever, right? I don't care who it is, they're responding to your issues and actually making a difference on the issues that you care about. And I hopefully, I will see a lot of my students and younger people who graduated from Drew in a couple of years vote. I really don't care if you vote Republican or Democrat or whatever, but vote and make yourself heard, because the only way that this democracy survives is for us to take ownership over the process and, do our part to make the world a better place. That's my 2 cents on that one. Thank you for the applause.
Karina?
So my question is more about, I was just looking at my notes just to make sure, more about how social media, and you mentioned in the presentation how a lot of people my age, as well as people in general, political identity is a very big topic right now.
Sure,
People
absolutely.
questioning what they believe in and their values and which party to coincide with, especially because Biden is not as like you mentioned, he's focusing on COVID and healthcare. So there's the question of like, obviously there has to be highlights for each candidate to focus on issues, but why is the topic of underrepresented minorities not mentioned? So with that, my question is more so about, what do you think, like, how do you think this will severely impact the future of political identity with social media and the extent of transparency amongst the candidates, and how that ties into political identity for people? Because this is really a division of political identity in today's world, especially with Antifa and other things you mentioned. I hope that made sense.
It makes sense. I mean, and let me say a couple of things about, I find the vice president's position frustrating. Doesn't mean that in the end he's a bad person for the job, but I think we have a moment in America where people woke up to the realities of injustice. That many people, I'm Puerto Rican, right? I mean, so that minorities around the country have felt for many, 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 many years, and what happened in Minneapolis is one of the worst things that that I have seen on video, and social media spread that message around. And because of social media, people got to the streets and did things, right? And this time it was different, because think about it. Before, you had a lot of like activism online, but people didn't join the protest, right? I mean, they were tweeting and saying, "Oh, yeah, I support you," and that was good. I mean, because you're creating this online movement for change. But man, there's something to be said about going to the streets and taking over a city and making your demands heard. And it really has an impact. And it definitely, the BLM movement was able to finally break through the media cycle and be able to actually put, information, for people to think about. And the polling suggested that white Americans were listening. And, they may not have supported completely the funding on the police, but they were willing to talk about it. And I think the Biden campaign lost an opportunity. They're looking for, of course, the independent voter, the more conservative voter. They're trying to take away that from Trump. And I understand politics, but I also understand that there's a morality to it that we should not ignore. And for me, when the vice president says that he's going to have a summit in the White House and bring together the protesters and the police, and to talk about, how they're going to reform the systems in the sidelines, well, it's a slap in the face. And I wish, and I understand that the vice president cannot go out and protest because of the limitations on COVID and all that. I get all that. But I would like for him to not only talk about the protest, but tell me how he's going to make things different. And so far, what I hear is the same thing that we heard from the Obama years, which, didn't go far enough. I mean, to be completely honest, I mean, when Skip Gate was, basically arrested in his own house in Massachusetts, the president had the beer summit. He brought the police officer from Harvard. He brought, the professor from Harvard. They had a beer to talk about, discrimination in America. Well, that's great, but that's not enough, right? We need real reforms in this country. And now that the House is in Democratic control, that the Senate may be Democratic, we have an opportunity to actually push for the reforms that we need in America. And hopefully some Republicans will get on board and also join the effort. I don't think it's going to happen, of course, but I would like for that to happen. And that's my 2 cents on this one. So what I see in social media is that, it's a double-edged sword. It should not replace, face-to-face interaction. It should not change the things that we tend to do in our society. And I know I say this now because with Corona, we're more isolated than before. And social media is definitely a bridge. I mean, we're here because of the technology, but a lot of the things that we hold dear had to be done on a face-to-face basis. It's done on a physical level. Voting is not only a physical thing, but it tends to have a more deeper meaning, because it's when America chooses not only a person, but it's also reaffirming the belief in the constitutional values that define this country, right? And then those constitutional values need to adapt to the new reality and need to be able to work for people who are underrepresented, both in the economy as well as in the political system. So that's my frustration with Mr. Biden. I wish his campaign really tackled the issue a little bit stronger. In the town halls, they've been trying to push him a little bit on this one, and he doesn't, actually, get pushed too much, I guess. He tries to move around and walks around the issue, but we'll see. I'm hopeful that that we will start talking about these issues and we'll tackle them going forward. And if not, it will happen at Drew. We'll talk about it at Drew. We'll make it happen at Drew, and your generation will finally do it. And we'll support you for sure.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. Any other questions for me?
Yeah, there's one more question and a comment in the chat. Can we agree that Trump's use of Twitter has at least aided him in decreasing the blow to his campaign during controversial moments?
Yeah, that's to be understood, actually. He has been the master of changing topics, and like the tax returns is a great example. Last week we had that big story on tax returns, and the president quickly started to pivot, with other issues, and started retweeting all these crazy things in order to get people to not talk about the fact that he probably pays $750, a year on taxes, right? I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, the president is a very savvy person. The president understands the media landscape better than anybody. The president is a TV star. The president knows what sells. What he did at the White House the other day, coming out of the helicopter, taking off the mask, saying goodbye from the portico of the White House, I was insulted. But also, you have to admire the fact that he knows how to manipulate the media in a way that it was carried, and it will do that. I think it will backfire on him. But but yes, I mean, but the YouGov people and the economists actually have been running this question in their polls for 4 years now. Do you support President Trump's use of Twitter? And only 30% of Americans agrees with him on that one. 70% Democrat, Republican don't like the fact that he's tweeting, and I think his Twitter behavior actually hurts him more than anything. So that's just my view on that one.
Thank you. Martha, I don't know, did you want to say something?
Come in, Martha. Let's talk about it.
I didn't expect to be called again.
No, Martha, you had a lot of questions. Go on.
Yeah.
Which thing am I being called on? Because I was just writing another one.
Oh, you were? Well, just go ahead and ask, because I saw yours about the post offices and the reaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Please ask.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, for us in New York, we are really sensitive and scared about the post offices. And a lot of people I know who are voters are actually bringing stuff to the Board of Elections, including people who are, trapped in with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add, and I was just starting to say this, so I'll finish it and not write anymore. But for a lot of us in New York and in my neighborhood, yeah, we got a lot of vandalism. I live in Chelsea.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much nobody blames Black Lives Matter. And I think that's important to say. Most of us feel like there are people who've kind of tagged along, who are greedy, who are angry, or who are instigators. And I was part of the Vietnam anti-war movement, and I saw it then too. There were an awful lot of people who trip things to make people look at things differently. So I guess those are my comments.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo some of them for sure. I mean, the post office thing really worries me. Period. I mean, the post office, is being defunded, and the courts are forcing the post office to actually deliver the mail on time. Come on, I mean,
And Carlos, I will add, the people I know that in the lowest income neighborhoods are losing their post office boxes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we saw that in Maine, actually. And it's more difficult. My in-laws are in Maine. I just returned to New Jersey from Maine. I was there from July 3rd until this weekend. And people are freaking out up there about the problems of getting the mail delivered on time in rural communities. So it's not only the big cities, also in the rural communities. And I think it's a travesty. And I'll leave it at that, I guess. But well said, Martha. Well said. So any other questions for me before we say goodbye, I guess?
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Who are Twitter users?
Mostly, 40-something-year-olds to 50-something years old, and they tend to be extremely politically active to a fault, I guess, And yeah, Twitter is mostly, the consumption is mostly media and news media related stuff. You don't see a lot of people doing sports or other things in Twitter. Photography a little bit, but not as much as it used to be. I love Twitter. It is if you do the United Nations, then Twitter is everything, because every single UN agency and fund and every single person in the UN uses Twitter to advertise. So for me, it's an important platform, but for most Americans, it's Facebook. And Facebook is about everything. It's from family to pictures to, to sports, everything else. But those are Twitter users. If you guys are interested in more into this, into the profiles on social media used in America, I would definitely plug the Pew Research Center. And if you do Pew Research Center social media, you will see the stories from 2012 to today, to 2020, that they're actually, not only looking at who uses social media and why, but also does the demographic pictures. And it's a really good representation of what America gets out of social media and how they use social media for other purposes. So I definitely want to plug that in for you guys. And I think that was it for me, right?
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor.
No, thank you for everybody for joining me, and best of luck. And there's other great programming coming in the next couple of weeks, as Carol will be informing you. So my colleagues will have a panel, on the election, and it will be later this October, and maybe they'll contradict me, and that will be good, because we'll have something to talk about in my department. But stay safe. Definitely, please vote. And if you haven't been able to do so by mail, ask for your ballots quickly, because that's the way to do it. Anyhow, guys, it was really good to see you guys. Please, let's keep the conversation going. My email, and if you don't, it's in the website. Email me, and I'm willing to answer any possible questions you may have later. So take care. Best of luck.
Thank you.